before we dive into today's rather grim state of affairs, do hit that subscribe button because, frankly, someone needs to keep you informed about what's actually happening in this country whilst others are busy looking the other way. Right then, let's talk about something that's become so commonplace you've probably stopped noticing it. The empty shelf behind locked glass. The security tags on washing powder. The fact that buying a packet of razor blades now requires more verification than opening a bank account. Britain's shoplifting epidemic isn't just a statistic anymore. It's become the backdrop to our daily lives, and the latest figures are absolutely staggering. 529,994 shoplifting offenses recorded in just 1 year to June. That's a 13% increase from the previous year. Let that sink in for a moment. We're not talking about a marginal uptick or seasonal blip. We're talking about over 500,000 recorded incidents of retail theft in 12 months. And here's the thing that should make your blood run cold. Those are just the ones that actually got reported and recorded. The reality is undoubtedly far worse. The Office of National Statistics, bless them for their rather understated language, noted there have been sharp rises in these offenses since the pandemic. Sharp rises. That's one way of putting it. Another way would be to say that organized crime gangs have turned British high streets into their personal cash machines, and they are not even bothering to wear masks anymore. Not the pandemic kind, and certainly not the balaclava kind. But here's where it gets properly disturbing. We're not just dealing with opportunistic teenagers nicking chocolate bars. Retailers are reporting gangs, actual organized criminal enterprises, marauding into shops, sweeping entire shelves clear, attacking staff, threatening violence, and here's a truly brazen bit, coming back day after day. The same faces, the same threats, the same complete lack of consequences. It's become a business model, and business, as they say, is booming. The British Retail Consortium puts the cost of theft at £2.2 billion. Retailers have been forced to spend £1.8 billion on their own security. Think about that for a moment. Nearly £4 billion being drained from the economy, and who do you think ultimately pays for that? Not the criminals, that's for certain. It's you and me, the law-abiding customers, watching prices creep up to cover losses that shouldn't exist in the first place. The Express has launched something rather aptly called the Stop the Shoplifters Crusade, demanding that police actually attend all reports of retail theft. Now, the fact that such a campaign is even necessary tells you everything you need to know about where we've ended up. We've reached a point where expecting the police to respond to reported crimes is considered an ambitious policy proposal rather than, their actual job. And whilst we're cataloguing the nation's descent into disorder, let's address the other elephant in the room. Sexual offenses. 211,000 cases opened in the year to June, up from 193,000 the previous year. 72,000 recorded rapes. 72,000. In 1 year, in the United Kingdom. Those aren't just statistics. Those are lives destroyed, families shattered, communities scarred. Now, some of this increase is attributed to the Online Safety Act clamping down on revenge porn, which is certainly progress of a sort. But it also reveals just how vast a problem has become. The fact that legislation designed to address digital abuse has uncovered as many additional offenses should terrify us all. How many crimes were happening in the shadows before? How many are still happening that we haven't even begun to address? The political response has been, shall we say, predictably theatrical. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp didn't hold back, blasting Labour for turning Britain into a soft touch for criminals and a nightmare for victims. He accused Keir Starmer of lacking the backbone to make difficult decisions, of being paralyzed by left-wing backbenchers who apparently think criminals are victims and victims are statistics. Strong words. Whether they are accompanied by strong solutions remains to be seen. The Conservatives are promising 10,000 extra police officers and a hard-edged plan to put fear back where it belongs, in the minds of criminals. The Liberal Democrats Jess Brownfuller warned that shoplifting is becoming worryingly normalized, calling for a return to proper community policing with bobbies on the beat and staff police desks in every community. All very sensible. All very reasonable. All very much the same promises we've been hearing for years now. And then there's the government's response. Crime and Policing Minister Sarah Jones pointed to homicide rates hitting their lowest level since the 1970s and knife crime being down after just 1 year in office. She acknowledged that shop theft and street crime levels are utterly unacceptable and promised 3,000 new neighborhood officers to fight crime as part of the plan for change. 3,000. Not 10,000 like the opposition is promising, but 3,000. Here's what's maddening about all of this. Every single politician involved knows exactly what the public wants. We want to be able to walk down our high streets without watching shops being ransacked. We want retail workers to feel safe going to work. We want women to feel secure in their own communities. We want police officers to actually respond when crimes are reported. These aren't complicated demands. These aren't unreasonable expectations. These are the absolute bare minimum requirements for a functioning society. Yet here we are, watching the numbers climb, watching the promises pile up, watching the gap between political rhetoric and lived reality grow wider by the day. There's something particularly British about the way we discuss this crisis, isn't there? The understated language, the careful statistics, the measured responses. Meanwhile, shop workers are being threatened with violence or minimum wage, and the perpetrators know, absolutely know, that the chances of facing real consequences are vanishingly small. The pandemic certainly didn't help matters, as the ONS carefully noted. But let's be honest about what happened. COVID didn't create organized retail crime gangs. It didn't invent sexual offenses. What it did was expose and exacerbate existing fractures in our criminal justice system, our policing infrastructure, our social fabric. The virus was a stress test, and we failed it rather spectacularly. There's also something deeply cynical about the political blame game being played out here. Labor blaming the Conservatives for the state they inherited. The Conservatives blaming Labor for making things worse. The Lib Dems positioning themselves as a sensible middle ground. And all the while, the actual people affected by these crimes, the shop workers, the assault victims, the communities watching their high streets deteriorate, are left wondering when anyone in power will stop pointing fingers and start solving problems. The truth that nobody in Westminster seems willing to acknowledge is that we've spent decades systematically undermining the infrastructure that keeps communities safe. We've cut police numbers, closed police stations, deprioritized so-called low-level crime, and created a culture where certain offenses are effectively decriminalized through non-enforcement. And now we're shocked that criminals have noticed and adapted their behavior accordingly. Shoplifting gangs operate with near impunity because they calculated the risk-reward ratio and realize the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor. They know that even if they are caught, which is unlikely, even if they are charged, which is even more unlikely, even if they are convicted, which borders on miraculous, the consequences will be minimal. It's rational criminality, and we've created the perfect environment for it to flourish. The sexual offenses statistics are perhaps even more damning because they represent not just a failure of law enforcement, but a catastrophic failure of prevention, education, and cultural change. Every single one of those 200,000 cases represents a failure to protect someone. Every one of those 72,000 rapes represents a life irrevocably altered. And the fact that the numbers are rising, even accounting for increased reporting and legislative changes, should be a source of national shame. What's particularly galling is that we know what works. Community policing works. Visible police presence works. Swift and certain consequences for criminal behavior work. Investment in youth services and social infrastructure works. Prevention programs work. None of this is mysterious or revolutionary. It's basic criminology backed by decades of evidence, but it requires sustained investment, political courage, and a willingness to think beyond the next election cycle. Instead, we get announcements of 3,000 new officers here, 10,000 promised there, crackdowns and crusades and plans for change. All very impressive sounding, all very media-friendly, and all rather meaningless if they are not backed by genuine, sustained, adequately funded action. The British public has heard enough promises. What we want now are results. The retailers spending billions on their own security aren't doing it for fun. They are doing it because the state has abdicated its responsibility to maintain order. When private businesses have to create their own parallel justice system because the official one doesn't function, that's not a policy failure. That's a systemic collapse. And passing those costs on to customers, which retailers inevitably do, means law-abiding citizens are quite literally paying for the state's failure to perform its most basic function. There's also something rather absurd about politicians from all parties queuing up to express shock and outrage at statistics that anyone paying attention could have predicted. These trends didn't emerge overnight. They've been building for years, visible to anyone willing to look. The sharp rise since the pandemic that the ONS noted, that was predictable. The organized retail crime epidemic, predicted. The sexual offenses crisis, long predicted. The only surprise is that anyone in power seems surprised. What we're witnessing is a slow-motion normalization of disorder. When shoplifting becomes so common that shops lock up basic goods. When sexual offenses rise year after year. When police numbers fall and response times lengthen. When criminals operate openly because they know enforcement is unlikely. When all of this becomes the accepted baseline rather than a crisis demanding immediate action. That's when you know you cross a line from temporary problems to structural decay. The thing about order and safety is that they're incredibly difficult to build and maintain, but remarkably easy to lose. And once lost, they're exponentially harder to restore. Every unpunished crime emboldens 10 more criminals. Every attack on a shop worker that goes unaddressed sends a signal. Every sexual offense that doesn't result in justice tells perpetrators they can act with impunity. We're not just dealing with individual crimes anymore. We're dealing with the cumulative effect of society that stopped enforcing its own standards. So where does this leave us? With 500,000 shoplifting offenses, with sexual crimes rising, with retailers footing enormous security bills, with police forces stretched impossibly thin, with politicians promising action whilst communities suffer. It leaves us with a choice, really. Either we decide that maintaining basic order and safety is a non-negotiable priority worthy of genuine investment and sustained effort, or we continue down this path until disorder becomes so normalized that we forget what functional civil society looks like. The politicians will keep promising their thousands of new officers and their hard-edged plans and their neighborhood policing initiatives. Some of it might even materialize. But until we see actual consequences for actual crimes, until shop workers feel safe, until women can walk home without fear, until our high streets stop resembling free-for-all marketplaces for organized crime, all those promises remain just words. Britain deserves better than this. We deserve to feel safe in our communities. We deserve police who respond to crimes. We deserve a justice system that actually delivers justice. We deserve politicians who treat public safety as a paramount responsibility rather than a political football. And we certainly deserve better than watching our country's social fabric fray whilst those in power debate who's to blame. But wanting better and getting better are two very different things, and right now, the gap between them has never felt wider. If you found this as deeply concerning as you should have, subscribe to UK Connors because someone needs to keep tracking this crisis whilst those in power hope you'll simply stop noticing. See you in the next one.